In the depths of the Pacific, a secret lies hidden beneath the waves. A mysterious sea fortress that was a crucial stronghold in the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal has been shrouded in secrecy for decades. The United States Navy employed this formidable structure to turn the tide of the battle, but its existence was meant to remain classified. What is the story waiting to be uncovered? Join us as we delve into the enigmatic history of the mysteriously restored sea fortress the U.S. tried to keep hidden that changed the course of the war.
You want to live? Get off the beach!
The Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. On a cold evening on November 14th, 1942, a darkness enveloped the Pacific. The battleships USS South Dakota, Washington, and 4 destroyers embarked on a covert mission under Vice Admiral Willis A. Lee to intercept a significant Japanese fleet near Savo Island. Leading a group of destroyers and cruisers was the battleship Kirishima, one of the mightiest ships of the Empire. As the two forces clashed, the guns on both sides roared to life, ripping holes into hulls and decks. The Japanese ships lined up and moved in to deliver what they believed to be a coup de grace on the Americans. Not to be outdone, South Dakota and Washington mirrored the move, setting the stage for a fierce and intense battle that left everyone involved scrambling for survival. However, just as South Dakota was about to enter the fray, a sudden blackout struck, disabling her radar and cutting off communication with Washington, vital for the safety of her crew. Unwilling to give up, Captain Thomas Gatch, an eccentric yet beloved leader, decided to steam ahead anyway, trusting his expertly trained crew of wild men to rise to the occasion. Now, with both fleets mere thousands of yards apart, a rare event in World War II and naval history as a whole was about to ensue. A battleship versus battleship showdown. USS South Dakota boasted one of the most remarkable anti-aircraft arsenals of its time, featuring 40mm Bofors, 1.1-inch guns, and 20mm Oerlikon autocannons, all designed to create a lethal barrier against enemy warplanes. As the battle raged on, the crew's training and Captain Gatch's leadership would be put to the ultimate test. War is a phenomenon that rarely, if ever, erupts without warning or precursor. It doesn't suddenly materialize out of thin air, like a wispy tendril of smoke, without an underlying source. Instead, it is typically the culmination of a prolonged and intricate series of events, marked by countless hours of clandestine schemes, underhanded dealings, and frantic diplomatic efforts to stave off the inevitable collapse. Usually, in the shadows, hidden from public scrutiny, politicians, military leaders, and other power brokers engage in a delicate and often duplicitous dance of intrigue, each seeking to advance their own interests while preventing their adversaries from gaining the upper hand. Meanwhile, diplomats toil behind the scenes, desperately attempting to shore up a crumbling facade of cooperation and civility, even as the very foundations of peace begin to crumble and decay. So, this war grew from somewhere, in a room where all treaties were rejected. Treaties before threats. In 1938, as the Japanese Empire rejected all naval treaty obligations, the United States Congress agreed to fund major shipbuilding programs in readiness for whatever it is that's to come after a failed attempt at peace. By then, aircraft and submarines had made Navy battleships much more vulnerable than in World War I, where their only adversaries were ships of their kind. As such, new generations of modernized battleships like the South Dakota class had thicker armored decks and much more firepower, designed to make it harder for airplanes and submarines to catch and destroy them. Displacing a whopping 35,000 tons, South Dakota, the first of her class, was the heaviest United States ship ever constructed. Despite being nearly 700 feet long, the vessel dashed through the seas at a top speed of 27 knots, placing it in the fast battleship category of the Navy. These ships were expected to participate in task forces alongside aircraft carriers, protecting them and destroying everything that posed a threat.
Let's drop some lead on those motherfuckers!
Worsening relations between America and Japan hurried the construction of South Dakota, and when it was completed, the public was not allowed to attend the launching ceremony. Sure enough, by the time the battleship was ready for sea duty in August 1942, the United States was at war against the Axis powers. On the 16th of August, 1942, exactly 3 years to the day before Japan's surrender, South Dakota and her 115 officers and over 1,500 men crew began a long voyage towards the waters of the South Pacific. The battleship's first ever commander was Captain Thomas L. Gatch, a known eccentric, admirer of Shakespeare's sonnets, and an American Civil War connoisseur. With no previous combat experience, he quickly adapted, championing the philosophy that the primary role of battleships like the South Dakota was to decisively destroy enemy vessels and aircraft. As such, the skipper prioritized gunnery training at the expense of nearly every other task on his ship. Throughout the voyage, to ensure that their skills were honed to perfection, Gatch frequently summoned his crew to battle stations to drill with the ship's 16-inch guns, which fired massive shells weighing over a ton across a range of nearly 30,000 yards. With the constant drilling and practice, the men's gun handling skills improved quickly, earning the captain the nickname Gunpowder Gatch. Historians and former sailors agree that Gatch was an exceptional captain, adored by all his men for his unique leadership style. Gatch's leadership style was unconventional. He cared little for the traditional naval emphasis on appearance, allowing his crew the freedom to dress more casually. This approach fostered a unique camaraderie and a sense of rugged individualism among the sailors, often described as wild men. While the ship was often dirty, this did not imply a lack of discipline or readiness. The ship's guns were meticulously maintained. These unique rules and ways of living earned South Dakota a reputation unique among the Navy's battleships. As the battleship approached the war-torn waters of the Pacific, it was clear that the crew was ready for battle. Despite the unorthodox practices that had marked their training, the team had come together with a sense of purpose and determination. According to naval historian Samuel Eliot Morrison, no ship had ever entered the Pacific with more eagerness to fight. This was a testament to the leadership of Captain Gatch, who had exercised a natural gift for command to weld the previously inexperienced crew into a cohesive and formidable fighting team. A blessing in disguise. While en route to the Solomon Islands, the battleship struck a reef, causing significant damage that necessitated a trip to Pearl Harbor for repairs. However, this incident may have been a blessing in disguise, as workers also replaced the ship's anti-aircraft guns with highly effective 40mm models in quad mounts. By October 1942, South Dakota was finally on her way, just in time for the most intense moments of the battle for Guadalcanal. As the end of the month approached, Japanese troops were desperately trying to drive the Americans out of their land and into the sea, where a large fleet of carriers led by their fiercest Empire commanders was ready to strike and sweep away any American unit that stood in their way. Although the U.S. Navy was still perfecting its air attack defense tactics, Task Force 16, commanded by Rear Admiral Thomas Kincaid, consisting of South Dakota, carrier USS Enterprise, 2 cruisers, and 8 destroyers, was ready to fight. On October 26, during the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, Enterprise was quickly swarmed by a dizzying volume of Japanese aircraft coming from all sides. Maneuvering as fast as possible to get close to the Big E, the men of South Dakota finally put their grueling gunnery training to good use and unleashed all the anti-aircraft fire they could, claiming 32 enemy warplanes destroyed, though officially credited with 26. This came at a cost, as the battleship would not escape the battle unscathed. Amid the anti-aircraft melee, a massive 500-pound bomb hit the vessel's main gun turret. While the gun mount was so heavily protected that the gun crew did not notice the damage, the men near the bridge, including Captain Gatch himself, surely did. Severely injured in the jugular, 2 quartermasters quickly rushed in to save the life of their beloved skipper. Back on the damaged bridge, the heat of the moment caused a communication mishap that caused the ship to lose control and nearly collide with Enterprise, with the latter maneuvering at the very last minute to avoid it. The battle for Santa Cruz. With the skipper out of the fight, the executive officer stepped up and stabilized the situation, resuming their protective role over the task force. However, the scene was still chaotic, and the men of South Dakota, still extremely focused and stressed out of their minds, accidentally fired upon 6 SBD dive bombers returning to their carrier. This incident sparked a unique reputation for South Dakota: shoot first and ask questions later. Navy veteran Donald Young recalled that Navy pilots had a straightforward and cautionary rule when it came to the South Dakota-class battleship. They avoided flying anywhere near it, lest they risk being shot down by its formidable anti-aircraft defenses. The battleship's reputation as a formidable opponent was well-deserved, and its presence in the battle for Santa Cruz had a significant impact on the outcome of the engagement. Although the Americans suffered heavy losses during the battle, the South Dakota-class battleship played a crucial role in forcing the Japanese to retreat northward, away from the strategic island. This tactical victory marked a significant turning point in the campaign, as the Japanese were ultimately unable to maintain their position in the face of the battleship's withering firepower. On the morning of November 14, South Dakota was about to embark on her wildest adventure yet. When the Japanese group attacked a field in Guadalcanal Island, Task Force 64 steamed right towards the attackers, led by Admiral Lee, comprising Enterprise, Battleship Washington, and South Dakota, with a healed Captain Gatch back in command. However, as the sun set, knowing Biggie could not perform nighttime air ops, Commander Lee commanded the 2 battleships and 4 destroyers to look for and destroy the enemy. Shortly before midnight, around Savo Island, the duo of battleships encountered the angered group of enemy destroyers and cruisers, which quickly unleashed their power and damaged all ships. As a duo of heavy cruisers and battleship Kirishima closed in for a showdown, Washington and South Dakota did the same. But as the latter steamed towards them, all electrical power was lost due to a malfunction, leading to a radar error throughout the rest of the fight. Now, with no way of contacting Washington directly, South Dakota and her men had no choice but to face the darkness directly, steaming right towards the Japanese vessels as the enemy fired nearly 36 torpedoes. And as the smoke cleared, the American battleship remained unscathed, but the worst was yet to come. South Dakota was severely damaged and in deep trouble. Now, with South Dakota only 5,000 yards away from the Japanese task force, the enemy shone their lights upon it and fired mercilessly. While a battleship versus battleship engagement was a rare occurrence in World War II, on that fateful day, this was the harsh reality for Captain Gatch and his men. Despite their valiant efforts, they could not prevent the enemy from scoring over 40 hits, causing numerous casualties and wounded. South Dakota was severely damaged and in deep trouble. However, this carnage had a silver lining, as the fire and noise from the battleship-to-battleship encounter allowed Washington to pinpoint the positions of every ship. In retribution for their beleaguered comrade, Washington unleashed her main battery, reducing Kirishima to a blazing inferno, while the heavily damaged South Dakota escaped the battle at full speed, as did most of the surviving Japanese ships. As dawn broke at the designated rendezvous point, Washington's crew was uncertain of South Dakota's fate after her bold nighttime escape. The hours ticked by, with vigilant eyes scouring the horizon for the battleship's silhouette. Then, precisely at 9 in the morning, the agreed-upon time for the meetup, battered yet undefeated, South Dakota made her timely appearance, reuniting with Washington, her fellow battleship and savior. The damage from the encounter that South Dakota suffered was serious enough that she had to return to the mainland for repairs. Once at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the battleship and her crew received plenty of attention from the hero-seeking press and media. However, on the other side of the world, the rapid disappearance of the battleship after what became the Second Battle of Savo Island led the Imperial Navy to believe that South Dakota was sunk during that fierce fight. In fact, Japanese aviators had previously reported the battleship as lost in the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, a claim far further from the reality. A new predator in the game. The South Dakota battleship's enigmatic past led American naval intelligence to intentionally propagate misinformation, shrouding the vessel in secrecy. As a result, the ship was referred to as Battleship X in official dispatches and documents, rather than its actual name, South Dakota, for an extended period. This air of mystery surrounding the battleship only added to its allure, with the Western press nicknaming it Old Nameless throughout the conflict. However, to the sailors who had the privilege of serving on board, the ship was affectionately known as Sodak, a testament to the strong bond between the crew and their vessel. This dichotomy in names reflected the dual nature of the South Dakota's existence, a ship steeped in secrecy. After 2 months of repairs, Sodak was once again ready for sea duty, this time under the command of a new captain, Lynd D. McCormick. In the summer of 1943, she traveled to the Atlantic Theater, joining the Allied efforts to hunt down the Kriegsmarine's iconic battleship, Tirpitz. As the elusive German vessel wreaked havoc on convoys along the Murmansk Run, threatening to shut it down entirely, Allied war planners devised a strategy to use the ultra-fast American Navy battleships, proven in the South Pacific, to lure Tirpitz into a head-to-head battle, where aircraft could then finish her off. However, when the plan failed to materialize after 2 months, South Dakota had no choice but to return to the Pacific. There, the battleship rejoined a naval war in which the United States was gaining the upper hand against the Empire, with the Allies making significant strides towards victory. The fight goes on. However, there was still some fighting to be done. Between mid-November 1943 and June 1944, the USS South Dakota participated in various actions in the Caroline Islands, targeting a sizable Japanese base at Truk and supporting marine landings on the Marianas Islands, primarily providing anti-aircraft protection. During the iconic Marianas Turkey Shoot on June 19, 1944, where the Allies accounted for over 400 Japanese planes in a single day, South Dakota was the only major ship that suffered damage, as a 500-pound bomb hit the captain's quarters and injured over 50 men. After a refit, the battleship returned to the war, albeit with some new crew members, including Alan Vernon Robinson, a journalist-turned-sailor who chronicled South Dakota's final year of operation in World War II. In late September, as the Allies attempted to capture each of the Marianas Islands, Ulithi Island, the easternmost atoll in the chain, was taken virtually without opposition. However, Peleliu was much more heavily defended, and the struggle required 2 of the harshest months for the crew of USS South Dakota. Robinson reflected on the fear and uncertainty that he and his fellow sailors experienced, describing the constant sense of unease that came with facing an unpredictable enemy. He explained that the uncertainty was palpable, as they never knew what the enemy had planned, and even the smallest and seemingly insignificant events could quickly escalate into something for which they were utterly unprepared. This pervasive sense of uncertainty hung over the crew like a cloud, making every moment feel fraught with danger. Yet, despite the ever-present threat, luck continued to favor the South Dakota, allowing the ship and its crew to navigate the treacherous waters of war with a measure of success. From late 1944 on, as the fierce engagements South Dakota's men fought became less frequent, the battleship served mainly as a carrier escort and provided shore bombardment, primarily on Okinawa and in the Philippines. On July 14, 1945, South Dakota became the first enemy warship in nearly a century to fire directly upon the Japanese mainland. As night fell on August 10, 1945, after finishing a bombardment of Kamai-Shihad, the crew had barely survived a kamikaze attack and were ready to spend the rest of the day relaxing when they were notified of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs from a few days before. In an essay, Robinson recounted his experiences on the iconic day when the war finally came to an end. He explained that the crew had anticipated a sudden and unceremonious conclusion to the conflict, but they had not expected it to arrive when it did. At 8:55 p.m. on the night of August 10, 1945, the long and brutal ordeal finally came to a close for the sailors on board. The news sparked an outpouring of emotion, as shouts, screams, and impromptu celebrations erupted throughout the ship. The sheer intensity of the reaction was a testament to the overwhelming sense of relief and joy that gripped the crew. It was a moment that seemed almost too good to be true, yet it was a reality that they had long been waiting for. South Dakota was one of the American vessels on Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, when Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz officially accepted the surrender of the Japanese Empire. By the time the battleship left the bay a few days later, she had traveled 246,970 miles, nearly the same distance from the Earth to the Moon, having claimed 3 ships and 64 airplanes, an outstanding 13 Navy battle stars, and changing the lives of hundreds of the men who lived and served aboard USS South Dakota, a so-called treaty battleships. The South Dakota was ordered in the context of global naval rearmament, which occurred during the breakdown of the Washington Treaty System. This system had controlled battleship construction throughout the 1920s and early 1930s. Under the Washington and London treaties, so-called treaty battleships were limited to a standard displacement of 35,000 long tons and a main battery of 14-inch guns. However, in 1936, following Japan's decision to abandon the treaty system, the United States Navy decided to invoke the escalator clause in the treaty. This clause allowed displacements to rise to 45,000 long tons and armament to increase to 16-inch guns. Despite congressional objections to increasing the size of the new ships, the design staff managed to keep displacement as close to 35,000 LT as possible. They achieved this while incorporating the larger guns and armor sufficient to defeat guns of the same caliber. The ship's construction came at a cost of $52.8 million, equivalent to a whopping $779 million today, making it one of the most expensive American naval ships at the time. The South Dakota measured 680 feet in length overall, with a beam of 108 feet and 2 inches and a draft of 35 feet and 1 inch. She displaced 37,970 long tons as designed and up to 44,519 long tons at full combat load. The ship was powered by 4-shaft General Electric steam turbines and 8 oil-fired Babcock and Wilcox boilers, rated at 130,000 shaft horsepower. This generated a top speed of 27.5 knots. Additionally, the ship had a cruising range of 15,000 nautical miles at a speed of 15 knots. The South Dakota carried 3 Vought OS-2U Kingfisher floatplanes for aerial reconnaissance, which were launched by a pair of aircraft catapults on her fantail. In peacetime, the crew numbered nearly 1,800 officers and enlisted men, but during the war, the crew swelled to 2,500. The ship boasted an impressive armament, featuring a main battery of 9 16-inch Mark VI guns arranged in 3 triple gun turrets positioned along the center line. 2 of these turrets were placed in a super-firing pair forward, with the third located aft. The secondary battery comprised 16 5-inch dual-purpose guns, mounted in twin turret clustered amidships, with 4 turrets on either side. Notably, this configuration featured 2 fewer turrets than her sister ships, a deliberate design choice made to reduce weight and magazine space. This allowed for the accommodation of extra personnel and equipment, given her role as a flagship. To offset the resulting reduction in medium anti-aircraft firepower, the ship was equipped with an array of light anti-aircraft guns. As initially designed, the ship's anti-aircraft battery consisted of 20 1.1-inch guns and 12.5 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, each mounted in single mounts. However, upon completion, this configuration was modified to feature a battery of 7 quadruple 40mm Bofors guns, 7 quadruple 1.1-inch guns, 34 20mm Oerlikon autocannons in single mounts, and 8.5 caliber guns. The ship's armor plating was equally impressive, with a main armored belt measuring 12.2 inches in thickness, while the main armored deck reached up to 6 inches in thickness. The main battery gun turrets boasted 18-inch thick faces, mounted atop barbettes with a thickness of 17.3 inches. The conning tower, meanwhile, featured sides with a thickness of 16 inches. Changes through war. Of course, these modifications didn't stay fixed, as throughout her wartime career, the South Dakota underwent a series of modifications, primarily focusing on enhancements to her anti-aircraft battery and the installation of various radar sets. The first upgrade occurred in 1941, with the addition of SC Air Search radar, which was fitted on the foremast. However, this was soon replaced with a more advanced SK-type set. Concurrently, an SG surface search radar was installed on the forward superstructure, and a second SG set was added to the main mast following the Guadalcanal campaign in 1942. During her fitting out in 1942, the ship received a Mark III fire control radar, mounted on her conning tower to assist in directing her main battery guns, as well as Mark IV radars for the secondary battery guns. The Mark III was swiftly replaced with the more modern Mark VIII fire control radar, and the Mark IV radars were upgraded to Mark XII and 22 sets. In addition to these radar upgrades, the South Dakota also received a TDY jammer, In 1945, her traditional spotting scopes were replaced with cutting-edge Mark 27 microwave radar sets, and she was equipped with an SR air search radar and an SK-2 air search dish. The ship's light anti-aircraft battery underwent significant expansion, with 8 additional .5 cal machine guns installed in November 1942. During repairs in late 1942 and early 1943, 2 of her 1.1-inch quadruple mounts were replaced with 40mm quadruple mounts. By February 1943, all of her 1.1-inch guns had been removed, and 13 more 40mm quadruple mounts were added. At this point, her 20mm battery had been increased to 80 barrels, all in individual mounts. By the end of the war, 8 of these had been removed, marking the culmination of the ship's extensive modifications. The smooth ride post-war. On January 3, 1946, the South Dakota set sail for the Atlantic, steaming south to transit the Panama Canal for the final time. She then proceeded north to the Philadelphia Navy Yard, arriving on January 20th. Following her arrival, the ship underwent an overhaul in preparation for deactivation. Just a month later, on February 21st, Rear Admiral Thomas R. Cooley hoisted his flag aboard the ship, designating her as the flagship of the 4th Fleet, a reserve unit. However, Cooley's tenure was brief, and he was replaced by Vice Admiral Charles H. McMorris a mere 5 days later. On July 3rd, McMorris transferred his flag to the heavy cruiser Oregon City, and the Navy subsequently dissolved the 4th Fleet on January 1st, 1947. The South Dakota was decommissioned on January 31st and laid up in the Atlantic Reserve Fleet. During her time in reserve, plans were drawn up to modernize the South Dakota and her sister ships in the event they were needed for future active service. In March 1954, a proposal was made to equip the 4 ships with secondary batteries consisting of 10 twin 3-inch guns, but the plan ultimately came to nothing. Another proposal arose in 1956 to 1957 to convert the ship into a guided missile battleship, but the estimated cost of $120 million proved prohibitive. The conversion would have involved removing all 3 main battery turrets and replacing them with a twin RIM-8 Talos missile launcher forward, 2 RIM-24 Tartar launchers aft, anti-submarine weapons, and equipment to handle helicopters. The ship remained in the Navy's inventory for another 15 years before being stricken from the Naval Vessel Register on June 1, 1962. She was sold to the Lipset division of Luria Brothers and Corporation on October 25, 1962, to be broken up for scrap. Tugboats towed her from Philadelphia in November to Kearney, New Jersey, where she was dismantled. Through the efforts of the Sioux Falls Chamber of Commerce, some parts of the ship were retained and installed in a memorial to the ship in the city on September 7, 1969. The memorial features a low concrete wall built in the outline of the ship in full scale, with artifacts such as an anchor, a simulated gun turret, and a 16-inch gun displayed within. A museum was erected in the center of the outline, showcasing additional artifacts, including the ship's bell, sailors' uniforms, a scale model of the South Dakota, and various other displays. Furthermore, additional artifacts from the ship are preserved at the National Museum of the United States Navy, including one of South Dakota's screws and a section of armor plate, both of which are on display in Willard Park. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.